Master Chief Daniel Holt snatched the assignment sheet from the clipboard rack, looked at the 17-year-old standing in front of his unit, and laughed. It was not a polite laugh. It was not surprise. It was loud, contemptuous, and it rolled across the training yard like a verdict nobody had asked him to deliver, but that he was delivering anyway. "What is this?" he said, holding the paper up like it was something he'd found on the bottom of his boot. "They sent me a child." His men laughed with him. Some of them laughed because they meant it. Some of them laughed because that was what you did when the Master Chief laughed first. Either way, the sound hit the girl standing in front of them, somewhere behind the ribs, and she let it land, and she did not flinch. And in that single moment, every man on that base made the exact same assumption about who she was. They were wrong. The Nevada desert does not forgive weakness. It does not forgive arrogance. It does not forgive assumptions either, though. It takes its time proving that particular point. Sloane Calder had grown up 40 minutes outside Reno in a town so small it didn't have a stoplight in a house where the heat came early, and stayed late on land that stretched out flat and merciless in every direction until it swallowed whatever you sent into it that wasn't paying attention. She had learned to pay attention. She had learned to read the land the way other people read a room. And somewhere along the way, that skill had bled into everything else. She read people the same way. She read silence. She read the half second before someone decided to underestimate her. And she had learned slowly, and at some cost, that the half second was usually the only warning you got. She was 17 years old, 5'6", 132 pounds, with a pack on her back. Her hair was dark and pulled back tight enough that it never moved no matter what she was doing. And her eyes were a pale gray that people described as cold or calculating depending entirely on whether they had already decided to like her. Most people on first meeting her had not decided to like her. She was too quiet. She watched too carefully and said too little, and in a world that rewarded loud confidence, that kind of stillness read as either stupidity or arrogance, and people almost always assumed it was one or the other. The drive out to the base had taken 4 hours through nothing but rock and scrub, and a silence that pressed against the windows like weight. She sat alone in the back of the transport, with her pack between her boots, and her hands folded in her lap, watching the land change through glass that had been scratched by a decade of dust storms. The 2 soldiers in the front seat had looked at her exactly once when she climbed in, and then they had not looked at her again. They drove the rest of the way like she was cargo they had been told to deliver, and preferred not to think about. She was used to that. When the truck stopped and she stepped down, the heat hit her like a wall built specifically to stop her. It was not yet 11 in the morning, and the thermometer was already pushing 104. The base spread out ahead of her in low concrete shapes behind chain-link fencing, and beyond the fencing there was nothing. No trees, no shade, just desert in every direction. Patient and enormous the way it had always been. She heard the unit before she saw them. Voices loud and easy, the particular kind of confidence that comes from men who have never once had to wonder where they stand in a room. She rounded the corner of the main building, and there they were. 12 men in tactical gear ranging from their mid-20s into their late 30s. Every one of them built with the controlled economical power that comes only from years spent training for the worst day of someone's life. She knew their record. She had read everything she could find about this unit before she ever stepped off the bus that morning. They were the best the Navy had, and every single one of them stopped what they were doing the moment they saw her standing at the edge of the yard. At the front of them stood Daniel Holt. She had read about him too. 14 years of active service, 3 combat deployments, an instructor reputation that bordered on legend built on a single sentence he was known to repeat to every incoming class: weakness has no place here. And I will find yours. He was broad through the shoulders, his face cut hard by sun, and worse things, his eyes moving over her the way a scanner moves, cataloging, assessing, already arriving at a conclusion before she'd said a word. He held the clipboard. He looked at it. He looked at her. He looked at the clipboard again. Then he laughed. "Calder," he said, when the laugh finally settled into something closer to a smile, though there was no warmth anywhere in it. "It says here you've been assigned to train with this unit for the next 6 weeks. Joint evaluation program." He let that sit a moment. "Does that sound right to you?" "Yes, sir," she said. He turned to his men. "You hear that, 6 weeks? Somebody in Washington decided we needed a science experiment. What division sent her chief?" A man near the back called out. "The Girl Scouts." The laughter got louder. Sloane stood still. Her breathing was even, her hands quiet at her sides. She did not look at the ground. Holt noticed that. His smile shifted into something more deliberate. "You got something to say, Calder?" "No, sir." "Good." He stepped closer, close enough that the next words landed without effort. "Then let me explain how this works. I don't know what they told you back wherever you came from. I don't know what scores you put up or what committee in a conference room decided you were special. None of that matters out here. What matters out here is whether you can survive what's about to happen to you. And right now, standing in front of me, I don't see somebody who can do that." He leaned in. "I see a liability. I see a political checkbox. Somebody in D.C. decided to make my problem. Am I being clear?" "Crystal clear, sir." A big man with a jaw like it had been carved instead of grown stepped forward. Name tape reading Brennan. "Chief want me to show her to the washout quarters, save us all the time." "Not yet, Brennan." Holt didn't take his eyes off her. "She's gonna want the full experience. Aren't you, Calder?" "I'm here to train, sir." "You're here to fail," he said flat. Not even cruel, just stated the way a man states a fact about the weather. "But I'll let you do it at your own pace." He turned away. Done. Assessed. Dismissed. Whitfield. A lean man with red hair and a permanent squint stepped forward at the name. "Get her settled. She bunks in the auxiliary quarters alone. I don't want her with the team until she earns it." He glanced back once, almost an afterthought. "If she earns it." Whitfield looked at her the way you look at something you've been told to carry that you already suspect will slow you down. "Come on," he said, and walked off without waiting to see if she'd follow. She followed. That was the first time she wanted to say something. Not to defend herself, not to argue. There was a truth sitting behind her teeth that she swallowed instead. Because she had learned somewhere, in the long years after her father died, that being underestimated was not the obstacle. Being underestimated was the advantage. Let them not watch. Let them not see her coming. The ones who weren't watching never saw the shot land. The auxiliary quarters were a single room off the main barracks, a cot, a footlocker, a window facing nothing but open desert. Whitfield dropped her paperwork on the footlocker without ceremony. Reveille's at 0400. First formation 0430. You'll draw your training pack and gear in the morning. The chief runs a hard schedule. No special accommodations. He stopped at the door, looked back at her with something close to curiosity. How old are you actually? 17. Why are you here? She looked at him steadily. Because someone decided I should be. He stood there a second longer, like he wanted to say something else, then he left. She sat on the edge of the cot and unzipped her pack and took out the only personal thing she'd brought with her, a photograph. Small, the corners gone soft. A man standing in a field at dusk with a rifle loose in one hand and a smile aimed at something off camera. She looked at it for a while. Then she set it face down on the footlocker and lay back and stared at the ceiling and let her mind go quiet. Other people called it focus. She had never had a word for it. It was just what happened when things got hard. Noise went out. Signal came in. She slept. Reveille hit at 0400. She was already awake. The formation assembled in the cold dark before dawn. The air sharp with dust and dry sage. The men falling into position with the automatic precision of people who'd done it 1,000 times without ever having to think. She took her place at the end of the line. Holt walked the formation slowly, stopping in front of each man, and when he reached her, he paused a beat longer than he had for anyone else. You sleep Calder. Yes, sir. Good. Last sleep you're getting for a while. He moved on. The morning's first test was a 3-mile run, full pack timed. The pack weighed 65 pounds. She put it on without a word, adjusted the straps, and walked to the line. Brennan fell in beside her, looked at the load, looked at her. Want me to carry some of that for you? No. Wasn't charity, he said. It's strategy. You get pulled out in the first mile, you're dead weight the rest of the program. I know, she said. I won't get pulled out in the first mile. He studied her a second. You're either really confident or really dumb. Could be both, she said, and something flickered across his face. Amusement, maybe, before he buried it. The run started at 0500. The first mile was manageable. The second was not. The ground turned to loose rock, and the pack's weight found every weak point in a body and pressed there deliberately the way the desert itself seemed to test you. By the midpoint of the second mile, 3 men were visibly slowing. One was favoring a knee. Another was breathing wrong too early. Sloane ran. Not fast. Steady. The kind of pace that had found its rhythm and refused to be talked out of it. The pack dug into her shoulders and hips, and she paid the cost without comment and without counting it. Whitfield fell in beside her at the 2-mile mark and said nothing for a full minute. You trained for this, he finally said. I trained for harder, she said without looking at him. She crossed the finish line 11 seconds behind Foster, the unit's fastest runner. A man who'd made a point of letting everyone know it that morning. 11 seconds full pack, 104 degrees, 17 years old. The silence that followed was not the silence from the day before. That silence had been dismissal. This one had something else folded into it. Something Sloane couldn't name yet. but could feel pressing against the air like weather about to break. Holt said nothing. He wrote something on his clipboard. Brennan, under his breath, said, "Huh." That was the first crack. The day continued without a break. Weapons, maintenance, tactical briefing, obstacle work. She moved through every station without complaint, without asking questions, watching everything, filing it all away. By 1300 hours, the unit had been on its feet for 9 straight hours. At lunch, the men ate together at one long table. She took her tray to the far end and sat alone, not because she'd been excluded, but because she had no interest in forcing herself into a space that hadn't been offered. A tray hit the table across from her. She looked up. A younger man, mid-20s, open-faced, dark eyes, name tape, reading Doyle. "You don't have to sit alone," he said. "I know." "Then why are you—" "Because I want to," she said. He sat down anyway. "I'm Doyle." "I know." He blinked. "You know how?" "I read your unit file before I came here." "All of you." "That's either really impressive or really unsettling," he said. "Could be both," she said. He almost smiled. "You said that to Brennan too, didn't you? The could be both thing." He shook his head slowly. "It keeps being accurate." He looked at her with open curiosity now. "You know what the chief said about you at briefing this morning before you walked in?" "I can guess." "He said you'd be gone in 48 hours. He's never been wrong about that call. Not once in 14 years. She looked at him steadily. "There's a first time for everything." Doyle picked up his fork, ate in silence a while, then said without looking up, "That run this morning, 11 seconds is close. Real close." "I know," she said. "Foster's been running that circuit 2 years. I know that too." He finally looked up. "Where'd you actually come from? What's your background?" She set her fork down and folded her hands. "My father was a long-range shooter. Military. He started training me when I was 6. Distance reading, windage calculation, breath control patience. When he couldn't train me anymore, I kept going on my own." "When he couldn't train you anymore," Doyle said carefully, "what happened?" "He died," she said. The directness of it landed flat in the space between them. Doyle didn't offer sympathy, and she was grateful for that. Because in this context, sympathy would have been its own kind of condescension. He just nodded once slowly. Something shifting in his expression. Not pity. Something closer to understanding. "How long ago?" 4 years. "So you were 13? "Yes." He nodded again. "The chief's going to try to break you this afternoon. Heat simulation. He runs it hard. He's going to load you heavier than everyone else." He stood, picked up his tray. "Don't let them see you hurting. That's the one thing this unit actually respects, whether they'll admit it or not." He walked back to the main table. She watched him go, then finished her meal in silence. The afternoon heat simulation began at 1400 and ran into early evening. Her pack was, as predicted, 45 pounds heavier than standard. She noted the difference without comment and set off into the open desert with no shade and no mercy, the ground radiating heat back up at her from below, while the sun came straight down from above, cooking her from 2 directions at once. By the third kilometer, the temperature had climbed past 109. 3 men had already taken mandatory hydration breaks. One had dropped entirely, a heat cramp seizing his calf. Sloane walked, not jogged. Walked with the precise, measured stride of someone who had calculated exactly what each movement cost and refused to spend more than that. Her face stayed expressionless. Inside, her body was working harder than it had ever worked. None of that reached the surface. At the 5-kilometer mark, Holt pulled up beside her in a vehicle matching her pace, looking at her through the open window. "You're overheating," he said. "Your face is flushed. Your pace has dropped." "Yes, sir." "You want to stop?" "No, sir." That's not pride, is it? It came out differently than she expected, less mockery, more like an actual question. "No, sir, I know the difference." He looked at her a long moment. The vehicle rolling at walking speed. The engine a low murmur against the vast burning quiet of the desert. Something moved in his expression. Not softening. Not yet. But something being reconsidered. "Why are you here, Calder?" "To prove something." "To who?" "To myself," she said, and after a beat, "and to anyone who thinks this is about politics." He held her eyes another 3 seconds. Then the vehicle pulled away. She walked the remaining 5 kilometers and finished in the middle of the pack, with the extra weight in the hottest part of the day. When she crossed the line, Holt was standing there with his clipboard. He made a note. He didn't look at her while he did it, but she saw him write something down, and that was enough. That evening in the auxiliary quarters, she ran the day back through her mind, the way she ran everything, cataloging, filing, sorting. She understood Holt now, or had begun to. He was not a bad man. He had built his entire understanding of excellence on a very specific template, and she did not fit it. And the thing that made him dangerous was not cruelty. It was certainty. He was certain she would fail, and that certainty made him incapable for now of seeing what was actually standing in front of him. She lay back on the cot and turned the photograph over in her hands. Her father standing in a field in the early evening light, the rifle loose at his side, smiling at something off camera. She had taken that picture herself when she was 9 years old. He had told her once on a morning when she'd missed a long shot 3 times in a row and was fighting the particular frustration of knowing she was capable of something she couldn't quite reach. The shot doesn't care how you feel about it. The shot cares about your stillness. Get still enough inside, and the shot finds you. Tomorrow was the range. She knew it was coming. She had read everything about this unit, including their scores, and she knew exactly what their best man could do at distance. She had been shooting at distance since she was 8 years old. Tomorrow they would find out what that actually meant. She put the photograph face down. She got still. She slept. She woke at 3:58, 2 minutes before the alarm, and was dressed and outside before the first light touched the eastern ridge. Formation came in the gray cold, and Holt walked the line and stopped in front of her. "Range day," he said. "Yes, sir." "You ever fired a precision rifle?" "Yes, sir." "At what distance?" She held his eyes. 1,000 meters. The silence that followed was immediate and loaded. She heard Brennan shift his weight somewhere behind her. Someone near the far end of the line made a sound that might have been a laugh and stopped itself halfway. Holt didn't blink. "Is that right?" "Yes, sir." "And did you hit anything at 1,000 meters?" "Yes, sir." He looked at her 4 full seconds, long enough that the pause became its own kind of statement. Then he turned and walked away without another word. Behind her, she heard Brennan murmur to the man beside him, "She's either the most confident person on this base, or she has no idea what she just said." The morning's qualification went quickly. By 0900, the unit moved to the long range, where measured target stations sat at incremental distances under a sky just beginning to shimmer with rising heat. She stood at the end of the rotation and watched. Foster went first, precise and confident, his accuracy holding strong through 500 meters and starting to fray past 7. Brennan went next, consistent, unspectacular, the kind of shooter who never peaked and never collapsed. The rest of the unit cycled through in turn, while Holt watched and wrote and said little. At 10:22, he looked down the line. "Calder." She stepped to the position. "We'll start you at 300, he said, not looking at her. "Standard warm-up distance." "I'd prefer to start at 800, sir." The range went quiet, not gradually, but all at once. Holt turned and studied her with an expression that gave away nothing. "You'd prefer?" "Yes, sir. The warm-up distance won't tell either of us anything we don't already know. You know what this unit scores at 300. 800 gives you a real comparison." Nobody moved. Holt looked at her a long time, then glanced at the spotter, then back at her. 800. Fine. She settled into position. The rifle felt familiar the second her hands found it. She breathed once, twice, registered the slight drift of wind without looking down at the readout. Brennan behind her right shoulder said quietly, "She's not using the wind reader." "I see that," Holt said. "That's a mistake at 800. She didn't respond to either of them. She was already somewhere else, not absent, more present than she had been all morning, the particular stillness her father had taught her, settling over everything that wasn't the target. She exhaled. The shot broke clean. "Hit," the spotter called. "Center mass a few inches right, but clean." "Move it to 900, Holt said. She adjusted. She breathed. She fired. Hit. 1,000. The range went very still. 1,000 meters was not a training distance. 1,000 meters was the line that separated good shooters from the rare ones, and everybody standing there knew it. She heard someone whisper, "No way." She settled the rifle, felt the wind shift slightly, accounted for the heat distortion starting to rise off the ground, breathed and let the shot go, the way her father had taught her. Not chased, not forced, invited. She fired. The pause before the spotter called it felt longer than 2 seconds. Hit. Center. Clean. The silence that followed lasted 5 full seconds, and in those 5 seconds nobody on that range said a word. "Again," Holt said. She fired again. Hit. Again. Hit. A 4th time. Hit. On the 4th call, she heard someone exhale hard behind her. Heard someone else make a sound that wasn't quite a word. "Stand down," Holt said. She lowered the rifle and turned around. Every man on that range was looking at her. Not with mockery, now not with welcome either. Something suspended between the two, undecided. Holt's face had the particular look of a man whose model of the world had just been handed information. It didn't know how to file yet. "Where did you learn to shoot?" he said. "My father." "Military?" "Yes, sir." "Where is he now?" "Dead, sir." The word came out flat and clean the way she'd trained herself to say it years ago. Not to wound anyone, just because that was what it was. Holt held her eyes. "How long have you been shooting long range?" "Since I was 8. "Seriously, since I was 10. He looked at her a long moment, then turned to his unit. "Break 20 minutes. The men dispersed. She found a strip of shade against the equipment wall and let her hands rest still in her lap. Water bottle untouched at first, the moment settling around her without celebration, because there was nothing to celebrate yet. One performance didn't change a position. She had seen it in Holt's face. He had adjusted his assessment, but he had not changed his conclusion. Not yet. Doyle found her there the way he seemed to find her, without announcement. 4 for 4 at 1,000 meters, he said. "In this heat with a rifle you picked up this morning." He shook his head slowly. "Foster's personal best at 1,000 is 2 out of 5, and he's been shooting this range 2 years. You just went 4 for 4 on your first morning. That's not normal." "I know," she said. "I've known for a long time that it's not normal." "Does it scare you?" he asked. "When people find out?" She thought about that honestly. "No," she said. "What scares me is when they find out and they still don't change." He was quiet a moment, the desert air moving past them dry and metallic. "The chief's gonna run the kill house this afternoon," he said finally. "It's different from the range. It's not about marksmanship. It's about decisions under pressure. He's gonna put you in with the team for it, not observing, in the rotation." He paused. "That's his second test. The range was the first. He's layering them." "There's always a third," she said. Doyle looked at her, surprised. "You think there's a third?" "The first test measures individual ability," she said. "The second measures how you function inside a team. The third measures what happens when the situation stops being controlled." She stood adjusting her gear. "He's going to put us in something real, or as close to real as he can manufacture." Doyle didn't answer that. He just looked at her a long moment, like something in those 2 sentences had opened a door onto something larger than either of them had expected to find that morning. And then the break ended, and the unit began to reassemble at the far end of the range, and Sloane Calder walked back toward whatever Daniel Holt had built for her next, carrying nothing with her but the stillness her father had given her, and the quiet certainty that the desert, for all its cruelty, had never once lied to her about what she was capable of. She was 17 years old. She had been on this base less than 2 full days. And somewhere behind the eyes of every man who had laughed at her the morning before, something had already begun slowly, and against its own will, to change its mind. The kill house briefing happened outside the structure itself in the flat afternoon light. Holt's voice carrying the particular efficiency of a man who had run this scenario hundreds of times and trusted none of his men to remember the rules without hearing them again. "Standard protocol," he said. "You clear every room. You call every threat. You do not advance until the room behind you is confirmed clear. Team integrity above individual action." He paused, and something in his jaw tightened slightly before he added, "Any man or woman who breaks formation for an individual call takes the whole team down with them. We score as a unit." He handed out the entry order. Sloane would go third through the door behind Foster and Whitfield. The structure inside was a maze of interconnected rooms designed to disorient by intention. The layout shifting between sessions so that no one could simply memorize their way through it. The point was never the floor plan. The point was reading the room in real time under pressure with no second chances. They moved through the first corridor clean. Foster and Whitfield cleared the opening rooms with the easy competence of men who'd done this 100 times. Sloane followed the rhythm, matching their pace, reading their hand signals. In the fourth room, she stopped. A wire, low, barely visible, strung at ankle height across the threshold, leading into the central hub. "Hold," she said, quiet but clear. "Foster." 2 steps ahead. Tripwire at the threshold. Foster turned back, looked again. "I don't see it." "It's there. Catch the light at the right angle. It's rigged to the left support panel." Whitfield leaned in, squinting. "I'm not seeing it either, Calder. Could be shadow." "It's not shadow." From the comm on Holt's end, his voice came through flat. "Calder, what's the delay?" "Possible tripwire corridor 4 threshold, sir. Calling a halt for confirmation." A pause. Then, "Foster Whitfield, do you confirm?" "Negative, sir," Foster said. "I don't see it." Another pause, longer this time, and Sloane could hear the decision forming in it before Holt ever spoke the choice to test her authority instead of trusting it. "Advance. Whitfield leads." "Sir," she said, "if I'm right and we advance, we lose the team." "And if you're wrong," Holt said, "you've cost us 60 seconds. A beat." "Advance, Whitfield." She watched the conflict move across Whitfield's face, her certainty against Holt's authority, and watched him choose rank. He stepped through the threshold. The lights went red. 3 flat tones blasted from the overhead speaker. "Simulation terminated," Holt's voice said over the comm, stripped of inflection. "Full unit KIA. Wire triggered on corridor 4 advance." That's everyone. The silence inside the kill house had a particular weight to it. The silence of men who had just been told they were dead and knew someone had tried to stop it and hadn't listened. She walked out into the afternoon heat and stood there with her face neutral, the frustration moving through her with nowhere productive to go. She had been right. They had known she might be right. They'd advanced anyway because the habit of hierarchy ran deeper than the data in front of them. Holt came out of the control structure and crossed the yard toward his unit, jaw set. He looked at his men first, then at her, and what came next surprised everyone standing there, including her. "Calder called it," he said. "She called the wire. She halted the advance. I overruled her, and I advanced the team, and the team is dead." He let that sit flat and unadorned. "You were right." "Yes, sir," she said. "And the team is still dead," he said, "because being right without authority is the same as being silent." He turned to face the rest of them. "That is not a criticism of Calder. That is a criticism of this team's inability to process a credible threat assessment from an unfamiliar source." A pause. "We run it again." They ran it 4 more times. Each time the dynamics shifted, and each time she called what she saw with the same precision she brought to the range, sometimes wrong. And when she was wrong, she said so immediately, without deflection. And the willingness to be wrong out loud seemed to catch them more off guard than the accuracy ever had. By the fifth run, Whitfield had started listening to her before waiting for Holt to confirm. Small, almost invisible. But it was there. Afterward, in the lowering heat, the unit gathered outside for debrief. Holt was precise, direct, and gave credit without warmth, but without omission either. And she respected that more than warmth would have earned. At the end of it, Brennan said something she hadn't expected. "Calder," he said. The contempt gone from his voice, now replaced by something flatter and more honest. "Good call on the wire." "Thank you," she said. He nodded once and looked away. It wasn't friendship. It wasn't welcome. But it was the first thing he'd given her that wasn't designed to diminish her, and she recognized it for exactly what it was. A door barely cracked open that hadn't existed 24 hours earlier. That night in the auxiliary quarters, she picked up the photograph and looked at her father's face in the fading light through the window. He'd told her once on an evening when a lesson had taken longer than she thought it should, that the hardest thing she'd ever do was earn the respect of people who decided before they met her that she didn't deserve it. Not because they were bad people, because they were human, and humans built their world out of what they already knew. And when something didn't fit, the first instinct was always rejection. "Your job is not to fit their world," he'd said. "Your job is to keep performing until they build a new one." She set the photograph down. Tomorrow would be harder. She could feel the shape of it coming the way she could feel weather change before the sky did anything visible. She woke before the alarm again, dressed in the dark, and was outside while the desert was still cold and quiet. The kind of bone-deep cold that vanished completely the moment the sun cleared the ridge. Doyle was already there, sitting on the low concrete barrier with a cup of coffee, and the look of someone who'd stopped pretending he'd slept enough. "Day 3, he said. "The chief calls it the separator. First 2 days, everybody runs on adrenaline. Day 3, the body remembers what it's actually been asked to do, and it sends the invoice. What's on the schedule? 20-kilometer march, full load, midday start." He looked toward the eastern ridge where the sky was just beginning to separate from black into something darker than blue. "He's loading you heavier again, 40 pounds above standard. Same as yesterday." She said nothing for a moment. Did Brennan say it like a warning or like he was satisfied about it? Doyle considered that honestly, somewhere between. "That's progress," she said. "Yesterday it would have been pure satisfaction." At formation, Holt walked the line and stopped in front of her. "How are the legs?" "Good, sir. 2 days of hard load. Most people are feeling it by now." "I'm feeling it, sir." "Good, and feeling it aren't mutually exclusive." Something moved at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. "Fair enough," he said, and moved on. Weapons qualification ran through the morning, and she deliberately let 2 shots go wide at 700 meters. Not failures, just wider than they needed to be. A small management of the unit's growing tension around her, outperforming a team without the relational foundation to support it, built resentment, and she understood that better than most 17-year-olds would have had reason to. Foster beside her muttered, Wind's picking up. Left drift about 12 degrees, she agreed. He adjusted his next shot. Tighter. He glanced at her. She nodded. He looked back at his scope. The exchange cost her nothing and built something small but real. At 1000, Holt called the unit into the briefing structure. 20-kilometer march begins at 1300, he said. Full tactical load. No shade stations, no vehicle support. If you go down, you radio in and you stay put until extraction comes. Extraction means you're done for the day and that costs you on your eval. He looked around the table. Questions? Standard hydration protocol, Brennan said. Plus 1 liter mandatory. Confirmed. Then a quiet voice from further down the table, Briggs, who rarely spoke first. What's the load distribution? Holt looked at him. Standard unit load. Exceptions noted. Briggs held his gaze a beat longer than was comfortable. The exception. The additional load assigned to Calder. Is that still in place? The room went very still. Every face turned briefly toward Holt, and then toward her, and then back. It is, Holt said. Briggs nodded slowly and said nothing further, but the question had been asked out loud in front of the whole unit, and it sat on the table in a way that couldn't be taken back. Sloane kept her eyes on the table surface and her expression neutral, but something in her chest shifted. Not gratitude exactly. Something more complicated. The recognition that she was being seen as a person and not only a variable, and that it had come from the man she'd least expected it from. At 12:55, she stood at the start point. The heat was already a physical presence radiating off the ground with the specific violence of Nevada at midday. The air completely still, in a way that somehow made it worse than wind. Holt stood at the front of the line, looked down to where she stood and said nothing. She said nothing back. They both knew what the next 4 hours were going to ask of her. Move out, he said. The first 3 kilometers were about finding pace. By kilometer 4, the extra weight had found her right hip in a way the shorter runs hadn't. A sharp signal she recognized immediately as a warning, not yet injury, but the precursor to it if she didn't manage it carefully. She adjusted her stride, shifted weight fractionally to the left, paid the cost in efficiency without comment. A quiet man named Hale walking beside her said, without looking over, "You're favoring your right. Managing it. Want me to take some of your load?" She glanced at him. His face was neutral, the offer delivered in the same flat, practical tone he probably used for everything. "No," she said. "Thank you." He nodded. "Offer stands." They walked in silence a kilometer before he spoke again. "I read your father's service record. Morrison pulled it after the range yesterday, passed it around." He paused. "He was at a forward post outside Kandahar in '09. "Yes," she said. "I was there too. Different unit, same theater. Everybody in country knew his work." Another pause longer. "I didn't know he had a kid." He didn't talk about personal things. "No," Hale said. "He wouldn't have." He looked over at her briefly, directly. "You shoot like him. I saw it yesterday at the range. Not just the accuracy, the stillness. The way you go somewhere else when you're on the gun." He looked forward again. I've only ever seen one other person shoot like that." She didn't answer. There was nothing to say that wouldn't diminish it, so she let the words sit where he'd put them and kept walking. At kilometer 6, the heat peaked 111 degrees in dead air, full sun with nowhere to hide from it. At kilometer 7, a man named Lang went down. Not dramatically, just slowed, then stopped. Hands on his knees, breathing through a system that had stopped cooperating. Holt was at his side in 30 seconds. "I'm good, sir," Lang said. "You're not good. Your lips are white. You're at the edge of heat exhaustion." Holt's voice didn't soften. "Radio in." "Sir, that's not a discussion. Radio in." Lang keyed his radio, the look on his face that of a man handed something he'd carry a long while. Holt put a hand on his shoulder for exactly 2 seconds, then turned back to the formation. "Move out." Sloane watched the whole exchange and filed it. 2 seconds. He hadn't wanted to show it. He'd shown it anyway. There was still a man inside 14 years of hardening, and she noted it the way she noted everything. By kilometer 13, Doyle had drifted back through the formation until he was beside her. "You're still favoring the right," he said. "I'm aware. It's getting worse. I know Doyle. Nobody would think less of you if you—" "I'm going to finish," she said. He was quiet a moment. "Okay," he said, and stayed beside her. The final 7 kilometers were the most honest thing she had done in years. There was nothing left to manage or calculate, just the next step and the one after it. The heat sitting on her like an extra weight, added to the weight she was already carrying, the pain in her hip. Having graduated from warning signal to constant conversation. She did not radio in. She did not slow below the unit's pace. She did not let it show on her face. At kilometer 19, Holt fell back along the formation until he walked beside her silent for a full minute, the end marker visible now in the distance, the most beautiful thing she'd seen in 3 days. "The hip," he said finally. "Yes, sir." "Since when?" "Kilometer 4. He processed that. 15 kilometers. Managed pain full load 111 degrees. He was quiet another 100 meters. "Why didn't you take Hale up on the offer?" "How do you know he offered a—" "Because I told him to." She stopped walking 1 full second before her body overrode the surprise and resumed the march. Holt kept pace without acknowledging the pause. "You told him to offer," she said. "I wanted to see what you'd do. And you said no, which is either pride or principle, and I've been trying to figure out which one for the last 9 kilometers. He glanced at her. "Which do you think it is?" She was quiet a moment. "Principle," he said before she could answer, more to himself than to her. "Pride would have made you want them to see how hard it was and refuse anyway. You didn't want them to see how hard it was. You just kept going." A pause. "That's a different kind of thing. The kind that takes a long time to learn, and most people never learn it at all." They crossed the finish line at 16:47, in the middle of the unit pack, a 17-year-old having matched the pace of fully trained Navy SEALs across 20 kilometers of extreme heat, with an injury that had started 15 kilometers earlier. She put her hands on her knees for exactly 3 seconds, then straightened. Briggs appeared beside her. "Hip's going to need ice and compression tonight," he said, matter of fact, the way medically trained people discussed injuries as problems to be solved, rather than weaknesses to be noted. I know. I'll get you the kit. Thank you. He nodded and walked off. She watched him go and thought about the question he'd asked that morning, the one nobody had expected. And she thought about Hale and Kandahar, and Doyle saying okay and staying beside her. The unit hadn't opened its door to her. That wasn't what had happened. The door was still mostly closed. But in 3 days, individual men had reached across the threshold in small, real ways. And that was how it actually worked. Not in one dramatic moment of collective acceptance, but in small increments accumulating until the sum of them couldn't be undone. The hip woke her at 2:43 in the morning. Not sharp, but deep. The settled ache of tissue pushed past its comfortable range, and now, filing its complaint in the quiet hours, she breathed through it, assessed it the way her father had taught her to assess everything. Systematic, honest, neither minimized nor exaggerated. Sore, not injured. She knew the difference. She moved through a slow series of stretches in the dark, and by 3:20 had worked most of the ache down to manageable. She thought about the day ahead, the advanced sniper evaluation. She'd predicted it from 4 days of watching how Holt built his tests, one dimension at a time, and then a condition designed to stress the whole composite at once. This would not be a clean range exercise with cooperative conditions. It would be everything together, moving targets, heat distortion, time pressure, and the eyes of the entire unit fixed on her. At formation, Holt stopped in front of her. "Hip," he said. "Functional, sir." "I didn't ask if it was functional. I asked about the hip." "Sore, not injured." "I know the difference." "I know you do." He held her eyes a moment longer than necessary, then moved on. At 08:15, the unit assembled at the advanced range. Holt stood in front of them without looking at his clipboard once. "Advanced sniper evaluation," he said. "Moving targets, multiple distances, heat distortion conditions. Scored on accuracy, speed, decision-making. No-shoot targets are integrated into the sequence. Engaging a no-shoot is an automatic fail." He paused. "Rotation order is reverse of standard. Calder goes first." The silence that followed had a different texture than any silence before it. Going first meant setting the standard with no reference point, every man behind her calibrating against whatever she did. She stepped to the line. The first target appeared at 400 meters, moving laterally. She tracked it, fired, hit. The second at 600 faster. A no-shoot target crossing seconds before the window opened. She waited. The no-shoot passed. She fired. Hit. The third at 800 heat distortion, rising visibly off the ground, bending the air between her and the target into something closer to negotiation than calculation. She breathed, adjusted, fired. Hit. Someone behind her made a sound that wasn't words. The fourth target appeared at 950 meters, moving diagonally, harder than lateral movement, because the angle never stayed constant. She tracked. Breathed, went still, fired. Hit. The fifth target appeared at 1,200 meters. Nobody had told them about 1,200 meters. The standard evaluation topped out at 1,000. 1,200 meters in heat distortion with a moving target wasn't a training distance. It was the kind of shot that ended up in after-action reports, passed quietly between people who understood what it meant. She heard Holt say very quietly to no one in particular, "Let's see." She looked at the target. Slow movement, slow enough that the movement itself was almost not the variable. The variable was everything else, 1,200 meters of heated, unstable air, bending light in ways that meant she wouldn't be shooting at where the target was, but at the point in space where physics and trajectory would bring them together. Her father's voice, not memory, now more like presence. Get still enough inside and the shot finds you. She went still. She fired. The pause before the call was the longest one yet. 3 full seconds in which nobody moved and nobody breathed, and the desert held everything suspended. Hit, the spotter said, his voice carrying a note of genuine surprise. Nobody spoke for 4 seconds. Then Brennan said, "What?" Not as a question, just a word forced out by a brain that hadn't prepared for what it had just received. She stepped back from the line and turned. Every man on that range was looking at her. Holt's face was doing something she hadn't seen it do before. Not cracking, not softening, something more internal. A recalibration happening behind his eyes in real time, visible only because she had spent 4 days learning his resting state, well enough to know when it changed. "Unit rotation begins," he said, voice level. "Foster." One by one, the rest of the unit ran the sequence. Foster hit 4 of 5, missing the first attempt at 1,200, before correcting on the second. Whitfield lost points on the no-shoot decision half a second too fast. Briggs was careful and consistent, and took his clean miss at 1,200, with the expression of someone who'd accepted the result before hearing it. Brennan went last, holding far longer than anyone before him on the final shot, working the variables with the deliberate weight of a decade of professional shooting behind him. He missed. He stepped back from the line and stood with his back to the unit for a moment. Shoulders set in a way that told her exactly how much that miss had cost him to absorb in front of everyone. Holt tallied the scores, looked at the clipboard a moment, then up. "Calder, 5 for 5. 1,200 confirmed." A pause. "Unit high score by a margin I'm not going to read out loud, because I want you all to calculate what that means for yourselves." Brennan turned. His eyes found hers and held there. And what was in them wasn't resentment. It was something more complicated, the look of a man who'd just been shown something that cost him and was deciding in real time what to do with the cost. "Good shooting, Calder," he said. 4 words flat, without warmth, but without the old edge either. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. He nodded once and looked away. That night in the auxiliary quarters, she sat with the photograph in her hands and looked at her father's face in the dim light coming through the window. 5 days into a 6-week program. A unit that had started the week laughing at her, now standing changed in ways she could feel but not yet fully measure. Tomorrow would bring something else. She didn't know yet what shape it would take, but she had learned by now that the desert never stopped testing, and that the only answer that had ever worked was the one her father had given her, years before she understood why she'd need it. Stay still. Let it find you. She set the photograph down, closed her eyes, and let the desert hold its silence around her one more night before everything changed. Dinner that evening was the first meal she ate at the main table. It happened without ceremony. She walked in, picked up her tray, and Doyle slid down the bench to make room. And the space was simply there, and she sat in it. Nobody made a statement about it. Nobody marked the moment out loud. Conversation moved around her, and she contributed when she had something to add, and stayed quiet when she didn't, and nobody seemed to require more than that. Foster sat across from her quiet through most of the meal. Near the end, he said without looking up from his food, "The 1,200-meter shot. What were you doing with the breathing? Your hold time was shorter than I expected." "I compress the hold in distortion," she said. "The longer you hold, the more the heat shimmer drifts into your read. Shorter hold, cleaner data." He chewed on that. "I've been taught to extend the hold on difficult shots. That works in stable conditions. In distortion, it's a liability. You're holding longer to feel more certain. But the information you're getting worse the whole time you're holding it." He was quiet a moment. "Who taught you that?" "My father." He looked up at her then, something in his face that hadn't been there at the start of the week. "Hale told me about him. Kandahar." He shook his head slowly. "He was a legend in certain circles. I didn't know he had a daughter." "I'm not trying to follow him," she said. "I'm trying to find out what I am." Foster looked at her a long moment, then nodded once slow. The way people nod when they've received an answer they didn't expect and can't argue with. He went back to his food. At 2100 hours, the night movement exercise began. 3-man teams, full tactical kit, moving through a designated route in the dark, with threat actors positioned along the way. Her team was herself, Briggs and Hale, and by the end of the first kilometer, the three of them had found a working rhythm, the kind that comes not from people being identical, but from finding the configuration where different strengths reinforce each other instead of competing. Briggs read terrain. Hale handled communication. She read signatures, the small tells in the dark that gave away a human presence before the human presence became visible. At the 4-kilometer mark, she stopped so suddenly that Briggs walked a full step past her before catching himself. "What?" he said, voice low. She was looking at a ridge to the northeast outside the exercise boundary. The designated route ran southwest of their position. The ridge should have been empty. "There's something on that ridge," she said. Hale followed her line of sight. "Northeast ridge is outside the exercise zone." "I know." "Heat signature movement?" Briggs asked. "Movement," she said. "And light discipline. That's too good for a training actor. Training actors use standard gear, and standard gear gives off a signature even in blackout mode. Whatever's up there isn't glowing at all." Briggs and Hale exchanged a look in the dark. "Calder," Hale said carefully. "The chief's going to say the sector's clear." "Call it anyway." Hale keyed his radio. "Control, this is Team 1. We have observed anomalous movement on the northeast ridge outside exercise boundary. Requesting confirmation that no assets are operating in that sector." A pause. Then Holt's voice measured. "Team 1 northeast sector is clear. Continue your route." She kept her eyes on the ridge. "Something is up there," she said quietly. "The chief just told us the sector's clear," Briggs said. "I know what he said." They stood in the dark, and she felt the full weight of the choice in front of her defer to the authority she'd been operating under for 5 days, or trust what her own senses were telling her. She thought about the kill house, the tripwire, the exact same configuration, her certainty against his authority, and the cost of choosing wrong either way. "Briggs," she said, "you have the secondary radio." Yes. Call the base operations line, not the exercise channel. He hesitated half a second. The base operations line. Tell them we've observed unauthorized activity on the northeast ridge. Request visual confirmation from base security. He looked at her 3 full seconds. Then he pulled the secondary radio. What happened next happened fast. The ridge erupted. Not the controlled charges and pre-announced effects of a training scenario. The unmistakable crack and echo of live weapons fire. A sound no simulation had ever come close to replicating, and the difference between it and every training sound she'd heard in 5 days was so total and so immediate that her body was moving before her mind had finished processing it. Down, cover, now. Briggs and Hale hit the ground. Over the exercise radio, chaos broke loose, multiple voices overlapping. Then Holt's cutting through all of it. All teams, this is not an exercise. I repeat, this is not an exercise. Live fire northeast ridge. All teams take cover and hold position. 3 seconds later, his voice came through again. And she had never heard it sound like that before. Stripped of its managerial control raw. In a way that might have been the first honest fear she'd heard from him. Who called the base operations line? Team 1, sir, Briggs said into his radio. Calder called it. A silence that lasted exactly 2 seconds. All teams fall back to secondary positions. Calder, Briggs, Hale, you're on point. Guide the response. She was already up and moving before he finished the sentence. What followed was not the clean sequential action of a training exercise. It was the compressed, sensory-flooded reality of a situation that had stopped being controlled multiple moving pieces, and incomplete information, and the constant pressure of decisions that had to be made before the data that would justify them had finished arriving. She moved and called and directed with the same stillness she brought to the range, because it turned out stillness wasn't specific to marksmanship. It was specific to pressure, and pressure was exactly what this was. Holt reached their position 11 minutes after the first shot, coming in low and fast, breathing hard. His face carrying the look of a man running towards something he didn't yet fully understand. He found her eyes. How long, he said. I flagged the movement 4 minutes before the first shot. He absorbed that. 4 minutes during which he had told her the sector was clear. 4 minutes during which, if she had deferred, the team would have continued straight toward the ambush point. He said nothing for a moment. Around them, the organized urgency of a security response moved through the dark radio traffic vehicles, the base coming fully awake. You were right, he said. Yes, sir. He looked at her a long time, and what crossed his face wasn't simple acknowledgement. It was something more fundamental. A man confronting the specific kind of humility that only arrives when the thing you dismissed turns out to have saved your life. And you can't pretend not to understand what that means. How did you see it? He said. Movement discipline. Absence of IR signature. Whatever was up there wasn't glowing. You read that in the dark at 4 kilometers. My father taught me to read dark, she said. He said most people stop using their eyes at night because they're waiting for light. You don't need light. You need patience. And you need to know what normal looks like, so you can feel when something isn't. Holt was quiet a long moment, the sounds of the response continuing around them, the desert cold and vast and indifferent, Then he said something she hadn't expected in a voice stripped of rank and instruction. "I've been wrong about you," he said. "Since the first minute. I've been wrong." She said nothing because there was nothing to say. He was right, and he knew it. And sometimes the most powerful thing you could give a person who'd arrived at a hard truth was the space to stand in it without being managed. The base didn't sleep that night. Security teams worked the northeast ridge for 3 hours and came back with evidence nobody wanted to process. But everyone had to boot prints, shell casings, a firing position occupied by at least 4 individuals with professional equipment, and the patience that doesn't belong to opportunists. Whoever had been up there had been watching the base for a while, had been monitoring the exercise, and had withdrawn cleanly the instant the base operations line was called, which meant they'd been listening to communications, and understood immediately they'd been spotted. At 0240, Briggs knocked on her door. She opened it. He was still in full kit, carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who'd been running on adrenaline for hours, and could feel the exact moment it started letting go. "Chief wants you in the operations room," he said. She followed without asking questions. The operations room smelled like coffee and dry erase markers, and the tension of people who'd been working a problem too long in too small a space. Holt sat at the head of the table. Doyle stood against the far wall, arms crossed. Hale and Foster were there too. "Sit down," Holt said. She sat. He put both hands flat on the table the way people do when gathering themselves around something difficult. "The individuals on the ridge were a hostile surveillance team. We believed they'd been monitoring this facility for 72 to 96 hours, positioned specifically to observe the night exercise." He paused. "If they hadn't withdrawn when they did, and if our teams had continued on the primary route, we'd have walked directly into their observation zone." Another pause. "Possibly into something worse." The room was very quiet. "You called it at 4 minutes out," he said. "Briggs confirms the timeline. Hale confirms it. My own radio log confirms it." He held her eyes. "Walk me through exactly what you saw and when." She did precisely, and without embellishment, the movement on the ridge, the absent IR signature, the decision to go secondary based on the kill house lesson, the understanding that the exercise channel was itself the compromise variable. When she finished, Holt was quiet a moment. "The decision to use the secondary channel," he said. "That was the critical one. If you'd called it on the exercise channel, they'd have heard it and been gone before security could respond." He looked at her. "How did you know to go secondary?" "I didn't know," she said honestly. "I assessed. The kill house taught me the compromise variable in a controlled environment is usually the control mechanism itself." Holt nodded slowly. "We'll need a full written debrief by 0800. He paused. "Go get 2 hours of sleep first. That's an order, not a suggestion." She stood. At the door, Doyle's voice stopped her. "Calder." She turned. His face had something open in it. "For what it's worth," he said, "we're all still alive because you wouldn't let it go." She held his eyes a moment, then walked out. She slept 2 hours and 12 minutes, wrote the debrief in 90, and submitted it at 0748. At formation, she took her position, and it felt different this morning, not a sign chosen. Holt walked the line, moving with less of the impenetrable forward momentum she'd come to read as his default. He stopped in front of her. "How's the hip?" "Better, sir." "Good." He started to move on, then stopped, turning to address the whole line. "Last night, Calder made a judgment call that overrode my direct instruction. And she was right." He let that sit. That doesn't mean authority doesn't matter. It means authority without the humility to be corrected by better information isn't authority. It's noise. He held her eyes. "You weren't insubordinate last night. You had the discipline to find the right channel for being right, which is the harder skill." A single nod. "Good work." He moved on. She kept her face neutral, but something held at a specific tension for 5 days, released by a degree. Not completely, but by a degree. The unit debrief that followed was different from anything that had come before it. Not a training evaluation. An actual operational debrief. The kind that happens after something wasn't supposed to happen. Holt ran it cleanly, assigning no blame he wasn't willing to assign himself. "I gave incorrect information based on incomplete assessment," he said, when the discussion reached the moment he'd confirmed the northeast sector clear. That information, if acted on completely, would have moved the unit into a compromised zone. That is my failure, not the unit's, and I own it. "Sir, with respect," Brennan said, "none of us saw it either." "You weren't in the position to see it," Holt said. "She was, and she called it and I overrode it. The lesson isn't that I'm infallible and you should trust me blind. The lesson is that credible threat assessment from any source in this unit gets treated as credible threat assessment." A pause. "Rank doesn't improve your eyesight." After gathering her things, Foster stopped beside her. "I owe you an apology," he said. She looked up. "Day 1, the range, I said lucky." He shook his head. "I knew it wasn't luck by the second shot, and I said lucky anyway because I didn't want it to be something else. That was pride, not assessment. And pride's exactly what the chief said it is. It's noise." "You're a good shooter, Foster," she said. "That's not conditional on where anyone else lands." Something moved across his face, the look of receiving an honesty he hadn't required. "Thanks," he said, and walked out. Doyle's head appeared at the door. "Chief wants you," he said. His office. She'd never been in Holt's office before, small, functional, almost entirely without personal items, except for a single frame photograph on the wall she didn't look at directly. He gestured to the chair across from his desk, and she sat. He looked at her a moment with the particular quality of attention she'd spent 5 days learning to read. "When I received your assignment," he said, "I read your file, your scores, your evaluations. They were exceptional, off the standard scale in several categories, and I dismissed them deliberately." He paused. "Not because I thought they were fabricated, because I've seen exceptional paper produce mediocre field results enough times that I built a standing policy of treating exceptional scores as a liability until proven otherwise." Another pause, harder. "I treated your file as a policy case. I didn't treat it as a person." She said nothing. "That was wrong," he said. "Not tactically, as a matter of how you treat people." He held her eyes. "I threw your file in the dirt. I laughed in front of my unit. I told my men before you arrived that you'd be gone in 48 hours. and I said it with the confidence of someone who decided the outcome before the process began. He let that sit. None of that was acceptable regardless of how you performed. She hadn't expected this. Assessment professional recalibration that she'd been ready for. Not this, which was something closer to an actual accounting. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because you deserve to hear it. And because I've sent this same message to every person who came through here, who didn't fit the template, and you're the first one who stayed long enough to make me look at what that message actually was." He held her eyes. The message was that you need my permission to be what you are. You don't. You never did. She sat with it a long moment. Felt the weight of 5 days move through her, the laughing, the loaded packs, the dismissals, the proving herself into a silence that kept refilling the moment she emptied it. She let herself feel the anger of it clearly for exactly as long as it needed to be felt. Then she set it down. "I accept it," she said. He nodded. "There's one more thing." He opened a drawer, took out a thin document, slid it across the desk. "This came through the command channel this morning before the incident report had even been fully processed. Somebody in the intelligence community has apparently been watching your evaluation remotely." She read it. Read it again. A letter of interest from a joint special operations program referencing her range scores and somehow already the previous night's incident report, requesting she be considered for a specialized long-range reconnaissance program above her current clearance. "They move fast," Holt said. "Yes. You don't have to respond now," he said. "You don't have to respond at all. This is your decision." He held her eyes. "But I want you to know something. Whatever you decide, whatever program you go to or don't go to, what you are is not common. I've trained a lot of people in 14 years, and what you are is genuinely not common. The people who have what you have an obligation to use it. Not to prove anything, not to earn anyone's permission, because the alternative is a waste." His voice stayed level completely without sentimentality. "And waste is the one thing I've never been able to tolerate." She looked at the letter. She thought about her father standing in a field at dusk. She thought about a 17-year-old girl in the back of a transport vehicle 4 hours through the desert, delivered to a place that hadn't wanted her. She thought about a file thrown into the dirt. She set the letter down. "I'll respond after the 6 weeks," she said. "I came here to finish what I started." Holt looked at her a moment, then nodded. "Good," he said. "Just that." She stood and walked to the door, then stopped, hand on the frame. "Master Chief," she said. He looked up. "The way you ran that debrief this morning, the way you owned your call in front of your unit, that took something. Not everyone can do that." He held her eyes. "Neither can everyone do what you did last night." She nodded once and walked out. The unit was gathered in the training yard when she stepped outside, not formally assembled, just present the way people gather after something significant, needing proximity to the people who'd shared it. Doyle was there. Briggs and Hale stood nearby. Whitfield drank coffee and watched her cross the yard with the look of someone who'd revised an opinion and was comfortable living inside the revision. Even Foster, talking with Lang, glanced up and gave her a single nod, which she returned. Brennan was the one who said it. He turned as she approached loud enough for the whole group to hear. "Calder." She stopped, looked at him. "Good call last night," he said with the complete unqualified directness Doyle had told her was his one consistent quality. No edge, no qualifier, just the words stated as plainly as a man stating a fact about the weather. "Thank you, Brennan." He held her eyes a beat longer than necessary. And what was in them if you'd spent 5 days learning to read the space between what people showed and what they meant wasn't just respect. It was the particular regard that passes between people who tested each other genuinely and come out the other side knowing exactly what each was worth. He gave a single nod. She returned it, and the conversation moved on around them, easy now, slightly frantic in the way people get when processing something real together. And she stood in the middle of it without feeling like an outsider. She didn't feel like a science experiment or a political checkbox or a liability or a girl who wandered somewhere she didn't belong. She felt like exactly what she was. That evening on the cot in the auxiliary quarters, she picked up the photograph one more time. Her father's face in the field light, the rifle loose at his side. The smile aimed at something off camera. She'd taken that picture when she was 9, and she'd carried it through everything since, and she looked at it now with the particular fullness of someone carrying a loss and a gratitude at the same time, no longer trying to separate the two. "I finished the march," she said quietly. "I went 5 for 5 at 1200. I called the rig." She looked at his face a moment longer. "I think they see me now." She set the photograph down face up this time and lay back and let the day settle around her, not reaching for the next problem or the next evaluation. She stayed in the moment the way he taught her to stay in the breath before a shot, fully there, fully still. Outside, the Nevada desert was vast and dark and indifferent. The stars unobstructed and enormous, older than every argument anyone had ever had about who belonged where and who'd earned what. She thought about a 13-year-old who stood alone in a field after her father was gone and made a quiet, private decision not to let the loss be the end of the story, to take everything he'd given her and keep building, to walk into every room that told her she didn't belong and stay until the room changed its mind. She had stayed. The room had changed its mind. Talent doesn't wait for permission. Instinct doesn't require rank. And the truth about what a person is worth can't stay buried in the dirt forever. Because the person always bends down, picks it back up, and walks forward. Sloane Calder was 17 years old. She was 5 days into a 6-week program in the Nevada desert. There was a letter sitting on a commander's desk from a unit that had started the week calling her a liability and ended it standing beside her in the dark. She closed her eyes. She wasn't done. She was just getting started.